We're back in Delancey, New York today. We're at the Citroen farm. And Dave's having one of his Citroens parted out. They're saving everything. It's kind of a rare car. It's a CX. What year is the CX, John?
I think it's an 86.
There's John's feet there. 86, and they were never really sold in this country. A few were brought in, and
I think it's 2000 were brought in.
2000 were brought in and set, and made up for U.S. standards, modified for U.S. standards. There's the farm boss of the Citroen farm. Oh, Dave's looking for a pair of old ice race tires that he's got in mind. We're going to do a little spot on the history of ice racing tires today. The Pumpkin's got probably more racing miles on it than, well, easily more than any other ice race car, right?
Very possible.
And more drivers too.
Maybe. I don't want to wear my sunglasses, but
All right. Dave's got some examples of tires that were used in previous years for ice racing. Of course, Dave has been ice racing since '82.
That's right.
And
this is the year 2000.
Yeah, right. So you've been at it a while, and that's why he's a good candidate to drag some of these older tires out. Plus, he's like me; he doesn't throw anything away either.
That's for sure.
So how's it go, Dave? Up till '75, races were run strictly rubber to ice.
Yep, it was a little before my time, but yeah, they did run just rubber to ice in '75, I believe. AMEC started running with studs in their tires, or some sort of metal in their tires. Originally, I believe they just used like Firestone Town and Countries or any kind of cheap tire that had a good block that had stud holes in. Eventually, there were rules about how many stud holes you could use per linear foot of tire, and we would actually drill holes in the tire to put studs in. The studs that were used initially were just regular street studs with a carbide tip, which meant they could be driven on the street. I think they found eventually that the longer you had the stud sticking out, the more butt you got, but also the longer the stud stuck out, the more likely the stud was to fall out after you drove the car, which wasn't too much fun because then you'd lose all your butt.
Yeah.
Now, the street type studs with the carbide tip, they worked pretty good, but eventually somebody came across these Max Trax case hardened tire studs. I still have a box.
And check it out. Whole box.
And these are just look sort of like a normal street stud, except they don't have the case hardened tip in the middle of them. These, if you were to drive them on the street, would they mush right away. So you could only use them on the ice. Now the big problem with that was if you put them in your tires and drove around, just like if you just popped them in your tire and drove around on the ice, more than likely they'd fall out. You had to do a couple of things, either put them in your tires and then put them on the non-drive wheels, drive around for a few weeks, and then they'd get it seated in there. They have this round head on the bottom, which the hole in the tire is just a hole, a tube like, and the end of the stud actually, once it's put in the tire, mushes into the rubber and interlocks in there. So the longer it has to interlock in there,
The better it'll stay in.
The studs were put in by just local tire places, and they just use a stud gun. You drop the studs in here, hook it up to an air line, and then you put it down inside the tire and pull this trigger, and these fingers would stick out and spread it.
Spread the hole and stick the stud right down in there.
That's right. I didn't have a. They have an automatic thing which keeps feeding studs, so you could go real quick.
Yeah.
I don't have that. But that was. Studs were really a pain in the butt.
Yeah, a lot of tire preparation.
They were always falling out. In the old days, you could get really good tires that had a real strong block which would hold the stud, and they were pretty good. But later on, the tires got more siped up and cut up.
Yeah.
And there was less places to put studs in.
That
and we would actually, drill the holes. In fact, I used like a hole punch. I would drill down in the tire, and it would actually drill out a core, and you'd go down and you rip the core out.
Oh, wow.
We would spend a tremendous amount of time preparing the tires to race. In fact, myself and Randy Kohler came up with a method that worked really, really well, but was extremely time consuming. I would stud up a set of ice race tires, and with Max Trax tire studs, and then I would take them and drive them on the street, which would mush them all over.
Seat them in real good.
I'd put them at least 100 miles on them.
Wow.
But by the time they were seated in, the top of it was like a mushroom.
Rounded off.
All rounded off. So then what we would do would be either yank all of those out and put new ones in, depending on the length, or we took a grinder and we ground a slot in each one and made them sharp again. And then that made the stud bite better.
And that could have been the difference between winning and losing on Sunday, right?
Oh yeah, but that would take like 3 hours a week to prepare all your tires.
Oh man.
It was a real pain in the neck. Other guys, I know one guy that actually took all of these, drilled them and tapped them, and put screws in from the bottom to hold them in.
Oh, wow.
And that didn't work because as soon as they wiggled, they busted all the screws off.
Oh.
And I know
it was a valiant effort, though.
That's right. I know people like Bruce Carlton. He used to clean all the holes in the tire with a special cleaner and put a urethane type glue in to try to glue them in. That's how hard we tried to keep the studs from
for that
falling.
advantage.
And it worked really good for a while, but they always would get bad, and you could get a couple weeks maybe.
It was a short lifespan to them.
That's right, very short. Eventually, we decided there's got to be a better way, so we struggled for a lot of years putting screws in the tires. And what we did at that time, we took like a number 10 or a number 12 sheet metal screw. We screwed them in from the inside out, and then we cut them off so that they would only stick out 3/16 of an inch, and then there was a certain number per length of tire, and that number changed over the years. Anything from 150 per tire to 18 per foot to 20 per foot to like 30 per foot. There was all different numbers depending on what we were doing at the time, trying to make them last. And obviously the more you had in, the faster you would go, and the more horsepower you needed, and some people thought that that was the opposite of what ice racing should be. So there was lots of feuds over that.
Show us one of these tires with this sheet metal screws.
This is this here was one of the better tires that was used at the time. This is a Kleber mud and snow competition tire. This was made for road rallying or off-roading, at least that's what I think. It had really nice blocks. You could put screws in wherever you wanted, and it made a difference on your pattern. You didn't want all your screws lined up in a row because it would just dig a row out in the ice. You wanted them staggered left and right so that each one would bite. A lot of tire technology, which just trial and error. It's really crazy how much time we spent on it.
Yeah.
Before this, like Kleber competition tire, they just used the town and country.
Whatever was available.
Whatever was available.
Generally available snow tires.
That's right. The problem with these was you have a screw head on the inside, which wiggles around because the tire
is flexing.
Then we had to come up. You couldn't just put the tire on and put air in it. That
would leak.
Wouldn't work. It would leak. It'd leak out all the screw holes and everything. Finally, we put a liner in there, and we tried all different kinds of liners. Bob Pashley used to use fire hose. He was a fireman, so he got all old fire hose, cut it up, and bevel all edges. I found this kind of rubbery stuff which had a nylon cord in the middle,
Uh-huh.
and we put that in. Eventually we found these things which farmers use. They're truck flap like things, except they're, or what they call the tire reliners.
Oh.
And they go on the inside of the tire
And protect the tube from the screw heads.
The tube, and the edge of it's nicely beveled so it
Nice
doesn't
edge.
cut into your tube. And you can see this one was used, who knows how long, but it chewed, the screw heads chew right into this.
Oh yeah, there's the imprint.
And eventually, even these would go bad. It'd chew right through these and you'd get a
Oh,
flat.
no kidding.
Oh yeah.
So that made the tire heavy though too, right?
Very heavy. In fact, check this tire out here. I got weight starting from here, going all the way over to
Oh wow.
here. Weight on the inside.
That's how out of balance they get,
There's
depending on the overlap.
Equal amount of weight on this side.
Just about 3 pounds of weight on that tire.
Yeah. I mean,
Wow.
you didn't need a heavy flywheel in the car. You had tires.
Right. Oh, there you go.
So, I mean, it's just unbelievable. Once you get going, you hardly get stopped.
Okay, what do we have next?
Well, up next, we tried to to make the tires bite a little better in all different ice conditions, from hard ice to soft ice. We started removing the tire, or the block of the tire, wherever there wasn't a stud, because you really didn't need the tire. The tire wasn't doing a heck of a lot, only the stud was doing it.
Right.
This also made it bite through the snow and slush, or if you wanted to go around somebody out in the real slop, it was a lot better than just trying to stay on the hard ice for good traction. Like on this tire, depending on how your car was set up, on my car, it didn't have the greatest geometry at the time, the front suspension, so I would load up the outside edge of the, actually this one was the inside edge, so this was probably on the right front of my car. I'd load up the inside edge of the tire with screws and have less on the outside edge, and maximize the tire usage on the ice, and that worked good. Of course, once you start chopping all these blocks off, then you really got the tire out of balance again. You
Oh,
had to-
yeah.
had to rebalance them.
And what would you use to chop those blocks to make those
I used
cuts?
a sharpened air hammer chisel.
Air
And
chisel
just-
with a sharp bit?
Yep, just buzz right
Shave them
through.
off?
Now this also was, these two here was another thing that people tried. These are recaps, and these are Bandag recaps. I think probably Rua's out in Cobleskill made them.
Oh.
And what they wanted was a good hard casing, and they would put on any kind of tread you wanted. And the reason we went with these was because the blocks were so hard. They were really hard and good for truck tires, you know.
Yeah.
And they held the screws really well. Nowadays, all the tires are like soft,
Yeah.
really soft. So they don't hold studs very well, or at least like these would. But the rubber itself actually works pretty good.
Yeah. So the rubber's contributing now to traction
That's right.
instead of just primarily holding the stud straight.
Right. So then later on, we got talking, because for a beginner to set up a set of tires like this, I was pretty good at them. I could do one tire in about 3 hours. One tire.
Yeah.
Took 3 hours, and that was drilling it, putting the screws in, making all the liners, putting another liner around the tube, and putting the tube in, mounting it, balancing it, shaving off the screws, and getting them all to
boy.
3/16 of an inch.
You were good, because the first set I did, I spent 4 hours each tire.
Yeah, and that's like total waste of time, and that really inhibits a beginner from wanting to get into the
Yeah,
sport.
all that work.
So we figured, well, our numbers were dwindling a little bit. Let's try something different. There's a couple of companies out in the Midwest. One was called Lindorfer. I think this was a Lindorfer. I don't really remember. This was a tire which came with studs molded right in it, which are similar to the Menard tires we use now. This is a little different tread pattern. It's very narrow. Didn't really work good on my car because it was so narrow. But the plan was a bunch of the A-class guys were going to all buy these tires and go out and try them together and see how good they work in comparison to the other cars.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was the only one that bought them. and I got stuck with a set of tires that wasn't legal for racing.
Poor Dave.
So I yanked all the studs out after I tried them once or twice and found out that they really didn't work as good as
Really?
we thought they were going to work. Then I put screws in them and tried them, and they still didn't work, probably because they were too narrow and the pattern sucks.
So you modified them to make them at least legal to use, and
That's
they
right.
really
And I
weren't.
used them a few times. They're really, really tall, too, which screwed up my gear ratio
Oh.
quite a bit.
165/80 B15.
Yeah.
Still bias ply.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got 1.5 inches of a rubber attached
Yeah.
to the top of that, so that was a really tall tire.
That leads us into what we're using today.
Right. The main race guys in our main ice racing classes are using these Menards ice racing tires. They're made by Menards, the guy that John Menard, his company out there in the Midwest, which makes the they have a chain of woods type stores, and they do the Indy racing also. But these are made by them. I think John Menard loved ice racing, and this was something he took over from someone else that either died or decided not to make the tires anymore. And we tried them, and actually we really liked them because you put them on, you just put air in the tires and go racing. And
Yeah, and they last.
Now there's only one problem with these, is you get a lot of horsepower that you can use on the ice.
Right, you can use lots of power now.
And it makes a big difference with your suspension. And if your car is not set up properly, you can wear these tires out, and these are about $150 each. You know, if you want to maximize your tire life, you should first maximize your suspension.
Yep, get the alignment right so you don't wear all the outside studs off.
And I would do that before I spent $5 on an engine.
Oh yeah.
I'm serious. Because
Yeah.
if you do that, then you'll be able to utilize your power, and it just makes everything more fun. You'll be spending less time mounting and balancing tires.
Yeah. And these tires were legalized, and they started use in the '93 season.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We still allow screwed tires. We still allow street studded tires with the Max Treks in the the 9.
I don't think there's one person that uses either.
Because they're so hard to do. So you just put them on, forget them. That's
Yeah.
about it.
Plus, these Menards seem to last on the cars, at least without a whole lot of horsepower, like mine,
Yeah.
like my
Couple of
1.5 liter Sentra. You know, I get a couple seasons out of mine. You know, because
That's right.
I haven't thrown any real studs. The edges get nibbled on a little bit, but some of the high horsepower A-class cars, they can use these tires up.
Well, there was one guy racing last year who would, I think, chew the edges off of one set of tires every single race. But he had like 300,
We know who that is.
350 horsepower. I would say that's either too much horsepower or not enough bite, or not enough tire. But my tires would last, a couple of weekends before they would start fading away, and then I could get a whole season out of them if I wanted.
Yep. And it's usually just the tires on the drive wheels that would wear. The other two tires, they would last a long, long time.
I have the original same tires on my A-Class car right now on the non-drive wheels that were on there in 1987.
Oh, wow.
So, or I mean, well, the first we started using them.
93.
Yep, that's
Yep.
right. Sorry.
Yeah, they'll on an unpowered axle, they're good for
just
a
ride
long,
around.
long time.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Dave. That kind of brings us up to date.
Sure.